Hello, my name is Leonard Kleinrock. I'm chairman of the Computer Science Department at UCLA. We have here a really exciting and dynamic environment. And one of the activities that contributes to that environment and that excitement is the constant flow of visitors who come and spend time with us and interact with our faculty and student body. Each year, we select a few from among the very best researchers in the field and ask them to participate in our distinguished lecture series. The high point of their visit is the presentation of a lecture to our faculty and student body. And at that lecture, they present the state of the art in their field of specialty. They describe the research results, the open problems, and the directions in which the field is likely to go. And as you might expect, these lectures always generate a great deal of enthusiasm and interaction. I'm really pleased you have chosen to join us today. Let's go inside. The lecture's about to begin.
Welcome. We have a treat today. This is not part of a regular series. It's an extra, a bonus. Okay? You seldom get one of these at the university. We have here probably the priest of high-tech nomadism. Okay, Steve Roberts. I first met Steve just a few months ago. October, we were doing a thing together up in Monterey. We were both keynote speakers, and I heard the thing you're going to hear today, and I felt we have to bring this to the university. The minds are receptive, the ideas are novel. Steve is a phenomenon, and you just can't not go through an education without hearing the way he thinks, and the things he's done, and the goals he has. He was born in Louisville, Kentucky. His parents, as is often the case with people who achieve wonderful and beautiful things in engineering, came from both the sciences and the arts. Sculpture, orchid growing, aeronautical engineering, aircraft designing. In fact, his grandfather was an aircraft designer who later entered the arts. And that same gentleman circumnavigated a large portion of the United States using ocean, riverways, Gulf, etc. The kind of background that leads to the broad approach that Steve has. He's been a hobbyist since the age of 8. Electronics was his game. And he participated very heavily in science fairs. And he sees this as a continual, lifelong science fair. The science fair project is something which does not repeat what others have done, but it breaks new ground. And he's continually trying to break new ground. His mode of thinking is one of passion and curiosity, not crank-turning. And if nothing else comes out of his presentation today, you'll hear that theme repeated over and over again. If you wonder what's motivating him, it's something you need to think about as well. He, in one of his earlier books called Creative Design with Microcomputers, I'll quote as follows. Art without engineering is dreaming, and engineering without art is calculating. He went to a small engineering college in Indiana, dropped out at 2 quarters, never went back. The problem was he made the analogy to going to an art school and learning to paint by the numbers. He doesn't like things being compartmentalized. He was afraid it would fry his brain going to an engineering school. He first designed a homemade mini computer in 1973. Before he got that working, the 8008 came out, and he designed a machine around that, got it working, formed a company, and was one of the first companies to go into the home computer business and sold the design to people who would listen. He's well published. He's been covered by the international media. He's here to tell us a story and describe his approach to nomadic computing. Steve?
Oh, thank you. Quite an introduction. Thank you. There are a lot of motives for this, and one of them has to be the bizarre encounters on the road. I recently was talking to a newspaper reporter someplace back east, and he said, tell me, what's the best thing about this whole adventure? And I said, well, I guess it'd have to be the people I meet. He says, okay, what's the worst thing about it? And I said, the people I meet. There are always these amusing encounters. I was in Seattle recently, and I got hungry, and I pulled into a Taco Bell drive-in window. Wasn't thinking much of it. I had these sort of high-tech wraparound sunglasses on and all this, of course, and the woman behind the counter looked like she was about to have a heart attack. And I just turned slowly and said, give me a burrito. Resistance is futile. Anyway, I suppose I should tell you a little bit about how this came about before I explain it, otherwise it will make no sense whatsoever. I was living in Columbus, Ohio about 10 years ago, and Columbus, Ohio inspires long-distance travel. Every direction is immensely appealing. But more to the point, I found myself in a strange mode, well actually a very familiar mode to a lot of people out there in the world, and that is that I was doing things that I didn't really enjoy anymore, trying to pay for things I really didn't want after all. And the whole system encourages this. You train for a while, you get good at something, and then you go get a job and slave to work up the career ladder while getting deeper and deeper in debt and slaving away really hard trying to make payments on the things that everybody told you should have, the house in suburbia and the riding lawnmower and all these things. Well, I did all that. And I tried growing up and didn't like it, in short. So I decided that what I should really do is see if there's a way I could base a lifestyle on my passions, and I listed them. Travel and adventure, romance, of course, computers, ham radio, networking, tinkering with electronics, bicycles, learning. And I just sort of threw all this stuff together and stared at it, and the obvious solution was to trash my lifestyle, get rid of the house, build a high-tech recumbent bicycle that's computerized and linked to the networks, and take off traveling full-time while writing about it. So I did. Here I am. Any questions? I took off in the fall of 1983 on the predecessor to this. It was called the Winnebago. The name occurred to me when, actually about 3 or 4 months later, I was in a campground in East Texas. I just finished my first real national news film in CBS Morning News, and they went and left me alone finally. And I got this quiet corner of a campground and was put up the tent and was stirring dinner, and this big motorhome pulled in and parked right next to me. And I was way far away from everybody else. And it sat there with the engine running, and then the generator started up, and I'm downwind, so I'm smelling diesel fumes and everything. A little annoyed. Otherwise, beautiful sunset, And then I hear this as the satellite dish went up so they could watch television. And then this kind of clunk as the hydraulic step went down. And finally, this very, very large man started backing down these steps, wrestling with an object that had tubing and wheels and cables and things. And it turned out to be a lawnmower, and he mowed the grass around his campsite. He was up from Houston to God's country, to get away from it all, as he put it. So as a joke, I called it the Winnebago, and the name stuck for a long time. I finally got rid of that, but I'll get to that. Anyway, I did about 10,000 miles in this machine solo, and it was actually the same frame as this, except it didn't have computers built into it. I just carried a laptop. And back in 1983, the exciting thing was the Radio Shack Model 100, and I later upgraded to a Hewlett-Packard Portable Plus. Signed on to CompuServe every day with acoustic couplers, and pull up to a payphone in a small town. Now this is 10 years ago. I'm sitting on the ground with this thing in Western Ohio, for example, and I got the little computer on the ground and the acoustic cups, and I'm doing my email. And this old farmer pulled up alongside in his pickup truck and got out, and he's wearing coveralls and shawing tobacco, and got the Caterpillar tractor hat, looking me over, spat tobacco juice and said, are you with NASA? So I said, well, yes, sir, this here is a Looney excursion module. Anyway, I did this 10,000 miles over a period of about a year and a half, had tons of adventures, wrote a book about it called Computing Across America, which is not about computing at all, it's about romance and adventure. But there was one little problem, that is that I couldn't do anything while riding. Every 10,000 miles is 1,000 hours of actual pedaling time, roughly. And add to that the overhead of falling in love and cleaning up and sleeping and eating. And when you get right down to it, as a struggling hand-to-mouth freelance writer, I had almost no time to really be productive. And so I was having more trouble than ever making ends meet. So I decided somewhere in West Texas, when there wasn't much else to do one day, and I was watching stories write themselves and kind of evaporate, that what I really needed was a handlebar keyboard. So the Winnebago 2 was born. It, like this, had a handlebar keyboard so I could type in binary while writing. I built a Radio Shack Model 100 in the console and hacked its keyboard drivers and everything so that it saw this I basically just typed in ASCII. Low 5 bits, A, B, C, D, F, G, H, like that. Shift, control, numeric, return, backspace, space. I can do the 30, 35 words a minute in raw ASCII. Easy to learn, if you forget, say, Q, you'd count up from P, so it's like a pretty simple code chart. And I took off on that and did another 6,000 miles on both coasts, this time traveling with a girlfriend who had her own bike and her own trailer and so on. But the trouble with that machine, the Winnebago 2, is that it was architecturally inflexible, and every time I wanted to add anything, I was editing with a soldering iron. And that's a really lousy way to edit. It's messy, it takes a long time. And also, I hadn't made it terribly serviceable. So that brings us to this. I decided to build Behemoth. Now, Behemoth is an acronym, of course, for Big Electronic Human Energized Machine, only too heavy. This took about 3.5 years to build with help from about 150 corporate sponsors and about 40 volunteers, roughly. And it's got a little out of control, but there's some interesting stuff on here, so I want to tell you about it. First of all, mechanically it's an interesting problem because fully loaded it's 580 pounds plus me. And getting that up a steep hill on a hot day is an interesting challenge. So the first project was to make adequate gearing. So there's a 105-speed transmission there. And basically I just took a third derailleur, and it's a 5x3x7 matrix. Pneumatic or hydraulic disc brakes. And down here you see these little wheels that look like training wheels. They're not training wheels, they're landing gear. Normally on the road these are retracted like that. They're pneumatically driven. And that's how I'm cruising along under regular conditions. I get to a steep hill and drop down into the ultra granny gear, which is 7.9 inches, which is 1.2 miles an hour at a cadence of 60. Then I drop those things and I can just amble slowly up the hill. That works fine, except one time in Wisconsin I was going up a very steep gravel hill and I got stuck halfway up because I lost traction. And I couldn't go backwards and I couldn't go forward and I couldn't go to either side. So I was just sitting there listening to the stereo, waiting for an airlift. I got my hands on the brakes. I'm holding myself in position with the hydraulic brake, and suddenly the disc brake from hell unscrewed from the axle. And it just wasn't used to stopping bicycles trying to go backwards, you know. And so I went tearing backwards down this hill until the trailer jackknifed. And now I was in the awkward position of being trapped under my bicycle. You know how embarrassing that is? Anyway, passing motorcyclist stopped and helped me out. But, so mechanically, the whole substrate here is designed to haul lots of stuff. This is a human-powered truck, basically. But more importantly, the design goal here was to see if I could render my physical location irrelevant. I mean, philosophically, what I want to do is be absolutely free to wander full-time. I don't have a house anyplace. I'm technically homeless. I'm a yuppie hobo. And I have to have enough tools with me to make myself just as productive in the middle of, say, Nebraska as I am at a workstation in Silicon Valley. Well, that's an interesting set of challenges. First problem was power. 72 watts of solar panels takes care of that. This is 4.8 amps in full sun and 12-volt batteries. There's a little power management system executed in Forth that kind of keeps the batteries happy and so on. There's a power distribution system in here that's all under software control, so every load, every device has associated with a little dedicated switching regulator, and those are all controlled by another Forth engine. So I'm only powering the things that are really necessary to be powered at any given time. So there's a sort of graceful shutdown. It's not like you throw this big master switch and everything wakes up. I've only powered up the things I need. Those things include the user interface here. There's a Macintosh in the console. That's about the easiest thing I could think of to build a user interface to a bicycle. HyperTalk I've used HyperTalk to write a bunch of graphic drivers for this low-level control environment. So the things like if I'm doing power management, for example, I don't want some number that tells me the status of a battery. I want a picture of a battery that's partially full of stuff, and a little reference line there, and then a bar that moves back and forth that shows me when I'm charging or discharging. So at a glance, I can see, okay, the battery's about this full, and yeah, we've got a positive charge source, so everything's fine. And then there are numbers that are calculated to show how much longer it will be till full charge. That kind of stuff is why we wanted to do a graphic user interface. But the main reason for the Mac and the console is for writing. I'm still working when I'm on the road. There's a Cord keyboard in the handlebars now that talks to the Macintosh and to the DOS machines. And part of the user interface is this is the brain interface unit here, this thing, that I should tell you a little bit about. First of all, there's a heads-up display here that's owned by one of the DOS platforms, and its purpose is, these days, I really thought I was going to be using DOS a lot more, but I finally managed to just about phase it out, and on the next project, it's history. But there's a driver that runs in the machine that drives this thing that lets me take my handlebar keyboard typing and do it in macros. So I can store up to about 8,000 RAM resident macros, things like TYVM becomes thank you very much, or if I'm writing about Los Angeles, I can just say from now on LA, just expand it for me so I don't have to spell it out. Doing that on the fly gets my effective data rate up to about 100 words a minute. The ultrasonic sensors here on the temples and the crown are picking up a 40 kilohertz signal transmitted from the console, and as I move my head around, the phase and Doppler data is converted into quadrature, and that becomes Apple Desktop bus events. So that's my mouse. I have a head mouse. There's a button that says track me and another one that says click. Also, there's a boom microphone and a couple of speakers here. This is all part of the bike sound system. You heard the music earlier, but there's a lot more going on with audio. In fact, every site, the console, the rump, rear unit of many purposes, and Wazoo, or a wheeled auxiliary storage unit. Each of these sites has an audio crosspoint switching matrix that can take any of 16 inputs, any of 16 outputs, and any of 8 audio long lines and connect them as determined by software. So if I want my speech synthesizer to say something over cellular phone, it's a matter of turning on a couple of bits in these matrices. Also, of course, if I want to feel lightheaded now, I can just throw a switch. It's light where I'm looking, not where the bike happens to be pointing. And one last thing on the helmet, there's a heat exchanger, speaking of hot days. This gets away from computers, but it's all part of the same big system, so we don't care. Problem, Western Iowa, 95 degrees, lots of hills, although it's not famous for that. This is a 7-liter tank here. I fill it with crushed ice on a hot morning from a 7-Eleven, about a 99-cent bag, fill it the rest of the way with water, put on this heat exchanger here, which is a whole network of tubes, plug the tubing in right here, and then I run a little peristaltic pump and it circulates ice water through the helmet liner. It pulls about 75 watts out of my body. It's an amazingly effective thing. I was cruising along in Western Iowa doing this one day. I was editing a file on the Mac in a nice big comfortable font so I didn't have to concentrate too much. And had some smooth jazz going like Cleo Lane or something like that. And this, just ambling along, having a good time, about even 9 miles an hour. And the cyclist pulled alongside, all the sweat and lycra and high speed and clips and things. And he slowed way down and looked me over and says, "Pardon me, do you have any Grey Poupon?" So now I've got these little packs here. Someday that's going to come up again. Anyway, back to computers. I have what I call mechanical display paging. The Macintosh screen flips up, and underneath is a VGA display for DOS. Turns out to be totally useless in direct sunlight. Frankly, I haven't turned it on in about 2 years, but part of the CAD system in the bike is implemented in that. I've really moved the main compute engine back here. This is the Spark Station. I've always wanted to try writing a Unix cycle. This is a Turing machine. There's a lot of places where I talk where I can't get away with puns like that. This is a color active matrix LCD from Sharp. It's a killer screen, backlit, beautiful, bright. I basically just hacked a Sun IPC, 424 meg of hard disk and 16 meg of RAM and fast processor and so on. Basically, it's just a Spark Station, but there is one other little twist. There's a little BNC connector here where another one of these antennas plugs in. There's a Motorola 9600 baud RNet wireless modem, which lets me take this thing away from the bike, log onto the bike, and go out to the world through the cellular modem or any of the other resources. I'll grab files off the Mac or whatever. So, and this also runs Morningstar PPP, so the bike has a fully qualified IP address. In fact, you can ping the bike and finger it and all that. Behemoth is alive. One of the main resources here is a cellular phone. There's, of course, a high-speed modem. I've got a Telbit Cell Blazer, and that lets me get about 10 kbaud over cellular. And that's the high-speed net connection. The problem is with that is that it requires me to be near cellular sites, and I don't like being near places that have cellular sites because they're called cities, and the traffic is worse. So I'm generally trying to get away from places where the cellular phone works, which creates an interesting problem. Incidentally, there's a lot going on right now in wireless connectivity and things like radio mail and the little paging systems. I've got an HP 95LX with a pager on it. All the stuff's great if you're wandering around a city, but for real traveling, it's not there yet. So the solution to that problem is a satellite earth station. This is Qualcomm's Omnitrax terminal. It's a 14 gigahertz, 1 watt spread spectrum uplink to the GTE G-Star satellite, 12 gigahertz back down. Very slow, 165 bits per second. But the cool thing is it just sits back there in the background. It just works. And I wrote actually a friend of mine wrote a tool for the Macintosh that sits in the COM toolbox and pretends to be a pop server, which keeps Eudora happy. That's my mail environment. So Eudora goes off and does its mail session and talks to the simulated pop server, which then talks to the satellite terminal, and somewhere back way below my awareness, this thing just sends and receives mail all the time. Also, what it does is when I turn it on, it finds the satellite, locks onto it, and no matter which way I aim the bike, it just follows all the time. And a nice spin-off of this whole thing is they do a bunch of time-of-flight calculations and stamp all my email, outgoing mail, with latitude and longitude. So I've got the X- location, and then, so the thing's pretty well connected. There's also a complete ham radio station back here, HF, VHF, UHF, television, etc. Well, we no longer have a wireless microphone. Can you hear me okay? I don't feel like putting this back together. Am I okay without the mic? Yeah. Okay. Good. So let's see. Distracted. Let me show you under the hood. Oh, the cellular phone. That's the other thing I didn't tell you about that. In addition to the modems, there's also, of course, a fax, and also credit card verifier. One of the things I do for a living is put out a quarterly journal called No Madness, and I find that sometimes when I'm on the street, I get the reaction, your basic sort of stall. This is, well, that sounds really great, but I don't have any money with me. I say, no problem, I take plastic. And I've had people do sales just to watch this phenomenon of somebody verifying their credit card on a bicycle. There's also a cordless phone answering machine. Too bad we just lost the wireless because I was about to demonstrate that. It basically says, I'm not on the bike at the moment, so please leave a message, and when I'm back on the road, I'll find it and call you back. The interface, by the way, is kind of neat. There's a product called the Cell Jack, which sits between the handset and the TRU of a cellular phone. And there's a little processor, and it does all the work necessary to synthesize the standard modular phone jack with a normal loop start phone connection. It looks absolutely standard, like what comes out of the wall. So any device that needs call progress tones and all that stuff can just plug into this RJ11 jack that runs around the mic. It's even one on the console. I can plug in a desk phone here and it will ring when the cellular phone rings. Serviceability is a huge design goal. I've learned from past machines that when I'm sitting in a campground in the rain and something needs to be fixed, I don't like stacks of boards held together with standoffs and lots of cables that have to be unplugged from the middles of boards and things. So I decided to make everything accessible. And I was speaking to a class in Talcott Mountain Science Center back in Connecticut, and just about a month ago, and I did this, and some little kid, his eyes got real wide, and he goes, "Oh, Transformer!" Actually, it's kind of fun to pull up in front of a bike shop. And so, you guys work on those little bike computers? He goes, "Yeah, well, what's the problem?" I said, "Well, it speeds greater than 20 miles an hour. I'm dropping Ethernet packets." Actually, I had a real problem at a bike shop in Illinois. I was on the Fox River Trail west of Chicago, and you know, Illinois is fairly flat around there, but just in negotiating little minor obstacles, they had these killer little hills that were no more. Wow. Something broke squelch there. Anyway, these nasty killer little short hills, which were no obstacle for any normal bicycle, but they were very bumpy roads, and I slowed down way too much. I got in the granny gear, put the landing gear down, and got stuck. And I was trying to ratchet my way up this hill, which of course blew the drivetrain fuse, freewheel. And so I kind of patched things together and limped painfully back to a Schwinn shop that I remembered seeing about 5 miles back. Pulled up in the front of the shop and parked, and this guy came out and he went, "Whoa, dude." And I said, "Well, I'll tell you about it in a minute. First, I got a problem. I blew my freewheel and I need another one." He goes, "Oh, no way. We wouldn't have anything like that." I said, "No, it's a new Winter Pro. You know, I just need a new freewheel." And he goes, "I'm sure we wouldn't have anything like that." And he's not hearing me at all. And I finally, it's a Schwinn bike shop, right? And I reached down and I grabbed the cluster and I said, "This is broken." He goes, "Oh, gear, sure, dude. We got gears." Appearances can really kind of get in the way. Anyway, here's the Macintosh back here. This is an old Mac. I just hacked a portable. This was before the era of PowerBooks. My new project, which I'll tell you about in a minute, is going to be PowerBook based. A couple hard disk drives that are on a little shock-mounted platform there. The whole console is shock-mounted. It's on these little Lord mounts. So not only does that protect the electronics, but it keeps me from eating headset bearings. The Winnebago 2 didn't have shock mounts, and I had to replace the headset about every 350 miles. So. DOS machine, yawn. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. I spoke at Microsoft, and it's amazing to see the reaction of the audience when you say really nasty things about DOS. This is the GPS receiver over here. I actually should mention a couple applications of GPS on its global positioning system navigation, and it comes in a lot of flavors these days. It's got a new one. It's a little handheld. And this is for my next project also, which is water-based. Obviously, you don't really need to know your latitude, longitude when navigating by bicycle, but one of the really nice things about that is it's part of my security system. There are 6 levels of security sensors here, and the thing's estimated value is, what, $1.2 million, and I tend to not like to leave it sitting out in parking lots at night. There's a 10 gigahertz microwave motion sensor here that knows if anybody's within about 10 feet. There's a physical motion sensor in the form of a fairly normal car alarm on Go Box. Okay, don't do that. Fine. It sees this kind of motion. There's switches on every access panel, so it knows if anything's being opened. It knows if the cable's being unplugged, if the wheels are turning, or if the latitude and longitude are changing without the right password. If I'm not logged in and that long changes by more than, I think I got 500 feet or something right now, then it assumes that it's being stolen, especially if it's correlated with emotion and all that kind of stuff. So if that occurs, all hell breaks loose. It speaks locally. Do not touch or you'll be vaporized by a laser beam. The value of saying that, of course, depends on where I am. In Southern Alabama, it was triggered once at a show, and everybody took about 3 steps back and went, "Whoa, dude!" However, I had it on display at Apple one day, and up in Cupertino, and somebody touched it and it said that, and I was like, oh, that sounds like the SCO1 chip. Well, where's this? So you got to kind of tweak the security system. Anyway, so it does that. It beeps you with a pocket pager. It sends out a beacon via ham radio packet, which makes no guarantee anybody's listening, which starts beaconing with btext equal to some help message. It sends a message to Qualcomm in San Diego via satellite. There's a standard panic line that you can just yank on the interface to this thing, and it wakes up, sends a help message stamped with that long. And it calls 911 with cellular phone. And when somebody answers the phone, the synthesizer says, hello, I'm a bicycle, I'm being stolen. My present coordinates are, and then it plugs in the lat long data. Now, here's the point of my telling you about this. That would have been a real tedious project had I not designed the architecture to be completely software driven. Let me talk about that for a second. When I did this one, I knew that the design was going to continually evolve like most designs do. No complex system is ever 100% finished or 100% correct. So inevitably there's going to be a lot of hacking. So instead of defining relationships between things and building a security system, and a navigation system, and an editing system, and so on, everything on here is just a resource, and in 3 domains. Every device has a software-controlled power switch. I use a yank 5-volt logic up to 15 volts, pull the FET up hard to 15 volts, and then that switches raw power to a local regulator, et cetera, et cetera. So any device can be turned on by software. Every serial port is just an address on a big serial crosspoint switch, and every audio device is just an address on this big crosspoint. So anything can be connected to anything. So all that business I just told you about security is about a page of code. It's really rather trivial. So anyway, oh, one other thing. Up here, the bicycle control processor. You mentioned the architecture here. This is again, serviceability. Board swings down, easy access to the kludge area, and then these little boards here. This is a 68HC11 running 4th. And it's kind of nice that 4th is in the kernel, so when you wake this thing up, it just comes up with OK. And you don't need the edit, compile, debug nightmare of using external development systems. You just build tools. And it's great for low-level controllers like this. I wouldn't try to do serious work with it, but one of those religious issues. This structure, by the way, was done with 2 types of CAD system. We used AutoCAD, made a little movie of it, and saw it all work. And I wasn't quite trusting it enough to immediately go from that to cutting and bending metal, since it's a lot of labor. So I used another kind of CAD system called cardboard aided design, and built a working model with duct tape hinges. Lo and behold, it works. Cardboard actually figured into this thing quite a bit. There's the rump and the wazoo back here are built with a substance I call the cellulose core silicon matrix polyester filled composite, which is hot glued corrugated cardboard with fiberglass over it. You just build what you want out of cardboard boxes, glass it, it's done. So let's see, those are the headlines. Probably a few things I haven't mentioned. I'd rather be interactive. What questions do you have about this? And, yeah.
What's your average speed when you're writing?
Depends on what I had for breakfast. I find that if I have coffee with breakfast, I get about 9–10 miles an hour. If it's latte, 11 to 12. So it's supposed to be decaf, about 7. No, it's 9 to 11 is a good average rate for level graphic. And it gets about 35 miles per pizza, roughly. Yes?
Talk about the interaction between your needs to use your eyes and your head as a mount for your eyes and as a mount for your mouse. Do you ever put something in the trash because you're looking at something?
Well, actually, it's funny because when I live in that environment for a while, the world feels like a giant windowing system. Reality is rude. And then I have all these windows. There's a Mac and it's a pageable window. So and then there's another window over here, which is the DOS machine. All these little iconified ones that tell me various things. And it's kind of bothered me that I can't swap them around. If I'm writing across Kansas and reality is pretty boring, I want to stick it down in the window and bring a 2-up page layout system into my CAD system out there to use all this great bandwidth. But yeah, actually, what you've talked about has happened. Where was it? So somewhere near Chicago, I think. I was writing along. I was really in the middle of editing something, and normally the 2 functions are so decoupled because using the computer is little subtle fingertip movements and head movements when I hold a button that says track me. It doesn't take a lot away from actually riding a bike. But somebody was walking down the street who I found absolutely fascinating, and I turned to look, and I really I expected the cursor to go, and I wanted to double click. It was just like the head. I hadn't gotten out of one mode yet before. So yeah, and also also, there are some things that the head mouse isn't very good at in a mobile environment. I tried playing Crystal Quest while riding one time, and I think the conclusion that onlookers had was that all of this was necessary. But for things like text and just interacting with the Finder and the Mac and so on, it's really good. Now, my next machine, this actually I might as well mention this now before I forget. This whole thing is being retired. It's moving to the Computer Museum in Boston. I'm building the CMOS microship. It's SEAMOSS microchip. And it's an amphibian sea kayak trimaran. I fell in love with kayaking recently, but found out that being just in a little monohull kayak is really a pain when you're out in open water and you want something from a hatch, and you have to do a wet exit and swim up to get it. So, oh no. By the way, this siren is great. The reason it's back here, aiming at the curved front of the trailer, it sweeps into the ultrasonic at 130 dB. And you know the problem? You're going along, on your bicycle like this, and a big farm dog comes after you. The dog closes with about this trajectory. Right? Well, there's a zone of terror on either side. If I push the button to manually trigger the siren, I haven't seen a dog yet that can get close. I mean, they'll always break off the chase. Anyway, the boat will be much more streamlined with pressurized equipment bays to keep all the nasties out. This can handle being rained on, but that's a whole different problem from being submerged in salt water. So there are 2 pressurized equipment bays that run about 2 psi above ambient, so it doesn't thermally breathe salt air if it develops a little leak. Mac in the console. My companion's boat will also have a Mac, and it's just connected with DigitalOcean, which makes a wireless AppleTalk, spread spectrum. Wonderful thing. They did a gorgeous job. So you just got this complete AppleTalk environment, between backpack and both boats. Qualcomm Omnitrax terminal on one of the boats, so one of them will act as a gateway to various wide area email services, and then have a local area network with the other boats and packs. Mechanically, the drivetrain for the boat is pedal powered, so there's a little recumbent bicycle that drops into the boat and locks down. So I'll just sit on a recumbent pedal, and that's tied to a prop. But when I face the problem, let's say I was coming here to visit, I might pull into Marina Del Rey or something, and I go, "What do you mean UCLA is not on the water? I still got to go many miles." So I would then pull the thing out of the water, take the bike out, attach its wheels, attach wheels to the boat, attach a trailer hitch, and now I have a 31-foot human-powered tractor-trailer rig. I think this thing gets funny looks on the road. Anyway, that whole project is set to start in about a month, and I expect to be mobile by '95 sometime. So. Yes?
Most of the applications you described, maybe I'm not being very active, sound like the kinds of things I normally do, except not in a mobile way. I'm curious whether you encountered ideas or uses that are not replays of via earthbound existence.
Well, 2 answers to that. In one sense, yes. Let me answer the easy part first. One of the things that makes this interesting to industry and to media, the reason it's kept alive so long, is that this is kind of a caricature of what a lot of people want to do. I do all the same things that everybody else does sitting at their desk. It's just I don't sit at my desk. Okay, and I think in a way this is kind of a harbinger of what's coming up, which is nomadic connectivity and not being forced to sit tied but to cable someplace in order to be effective. I know people at Sun who exist for 8 hours a day, and they disappear from the net, they lose their calendars, they just drop out of sight completely when they go home. Maybe they like that, a lot of people do, but I think most people tend to really want to have connectivity and tools and things available most of the time. So in a way, this is kind of a test case, admittedly extreme, for something that's fairly common. So it's nice that you point out that I do the same things you do, because it's true. There are some other applications as well, though. One of them I call the high-tech couch circuit management system. I gotta sleep someplace. I'm not going to stay in the Holiday Inns every night or whatever. I do credit card camping sometimes. I do have a large tent, and I camp, real camp, fairly often. But my first choice is always to stay with people. And there's around 4,600 invitations in my hospitality database. I have a tool on the Macintosh called GeoQuery. And wherever I am, I can bring up a GeoQuery window, show a map of the area, not real high res, doesn't show county roads or anything, but I can see the area. And it finds me with GPS, shows where I am on the map as a little special icon. And then every place I can say who's within 30 miles. And it goes into the database, and using 9-digit zip codes for location, it puts an icon on the map every place I have a contact. And each of those is labeled with a last name. And they're also tagged. The shape of the icon indicates whether it's a sponsor or a hospitality invitation or a subscriber or whatever. And I can click any one of those and bring up their database window and read the notes field and say, October 12th, 1986, you invited me to come stay with you, huh? Okay. So, highlight the phone number field, use the GPS to calculate range and bearing. Call, have the cellular phone dial the number and say, hi, you invited me to come stay with you about 5 years ago, and I'm 32 miles out at a bearing of 122 degrees. What's for dinner? So, and that's I don't quite take that approach, but that's the net effect. So there's something that deliberately supports a nomadic lifestyle. So, yeah.
This question is similar. You mentioned two buzz there. There's multimedia one and wireless second. And they get an awful lot of attention in the industry these days. It's just moving on very quickly. And they're all looking for the killer application, and I haven't found any, by and large. I mean, there's a little bit. Do you think you're onto some applications or some things that are not being seen by the traditional world that you've been forced to think about in this environment?
Maybe so. It's more of an integration issue because most of what happens in general in industry as well as in those industries is that people tend to build things for vertical markets that they're already associated with and that they understand. And so, a bigger and better word processor, a personal digital assistant with Lotus 123 in it or something, like as if you're going to sit around and recalc spreadsheets on an airplane flight. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff like that people are focusing on. I'm finding that the whole integrated package of being connected and being able to do mail and just all the stuff that people normally do, really, is what is most useful to me. Just things like the geographic stuff, being able to use GeoQuery is beautiful. Just being able to say, where am I on a map? What's around that I know about? How far is it to places? And you can have databases of anything. If you're into Motel 6s, you make a Motel 6 database. All you need is a name and a zip code, and it locates it for you. So certainly for people who are not chained to the desk, that kind of stuff is pretty powerful. And I'd like to see that all in a handheld with GPS built in. You are here, and this is the way to go to accomplish this, and label things for you, and so on.
So what's the pacing technology? Batteries?
Batteries. I hate batteries, yeah. And things with moving parts. I just saw a PCMCIA card in Boston the other day with 20 meg of flash in it. So we're slowly getting to the point where we can minimize power-hungry moving parts. I'd be absolutely delighted to throw away the last disk drive in my life and get past that. So things that are heavy, things that are chemical, things that break. Yeah.
Does any of your human power get self-charge the batteries, or is it only solar?
This version's only solar. I did do part of the system, a variable reluctance motor generator that was to be the front wheel hub. Much of it was already built for me, actually, by Semifusion, and we just ran out of time. The idea would be to decode the deadband between squeezing the brake lever and the pads hitting the disc, and then break that into 32 slices or something, and then proportionally pull power out of the wheel and throw it in the charge bus. It's really depressing to work for 8 hours climbing a mountain, ride the brakes down the other side, and see all of your body's energy just in the form of hot brakes. And the boat, I'm starting right up front with that. In fact, the connection between the pedals and the prop for mechanical convenience may accept a 20% efficiency hit and be done with 2 VR motor generator units. Because then, having a mechanical bus that can use pedals to charge batteries, batteries to run prop, solar panels to run prop, all these interacting things gets kind of mechanically nasty. Yeah.
Well, why the concentration on human power anyway? Why not motorized?
I don't want to be dependent on resources that I may not be able to get. Initially the reason for not using a motorized vehicle was kind of philosophical. It's not that I was a human power purist or anything, but I like bicycling because you move fast enough to eventually get through the forest, but you're still moving slow enough to see the trees. It's this sort of a human, contemplative, pleasant sort of light experience, not zooming through in a Harley Davidson. Total non sequitur, I just got to tell you this. I was visiting York, Pennsylvania 6 months ago or so, and a bunch of people from the Harley plant came over to the company where I was giving a demo. And some of the Harley engineers were standing around, kind of, wow, just looking it all over. They complimented me on this mechanical engineering, and I'm trying to turn the praise around a little bit and said, oh, well, you guys must have some fantastic structural design and material science going out there. And the guy said, oh, not really. If it needs to be stronger, we make it bigger, and if that makes it ugly, we chrome it. How's that for an engineering ethic? Close paren, but I forgot where I was. What question?
Why not power?
Why not power? The other thing is it just makes it bigger, more complicated, heavier. No, I like having something that I can move around with my body, haul into buildings. As soon as it's powered, then it starts to involve all kinds of laws that I may not want to have to deal with. I get pulled over by cops every now and then and think that this is some kind of motorized thing. But I got pulled over over in South Hill, Virginia once. Light, siren, everything. This cop walked over with his mirrored sunglasses on, his hand on his revolver, and says, "I just want to see what the hell y'all got here." But on the boat, I'll be using solar power for propulsion. Every square meter of solar panels is about 1 human, roughly, of my scale. That's about 140 watts. So there'll be 2 square meters of solar panels, and a good percentage of that power budget will be propulsion. But as soon as you put a big gas engine on it, then everything changes. It's not as much fun. Yes, somebody. Yeah.
Talk about integration before, and that seems like really the hard part of this sort of project. Hardware-wise, what do you use? What do you use to network your computers? Is it all serial? Do you have some sort of also software-wise, you talked about taking the coordinates for your global positioning satellite and pasting it into your GeoWebs database. How did you get all the software in place?
Okay, the interconnection between processors is almost entirely serial. Life is too short for reinventing wheels, and getting a lot of things that weren't intended to be in some kind of cohesive network architecture to talk to each other is this huge interoperability problem, as you know. And it's, I've got things like speech synthesizers and ham radios with serial interfaces, and trying to get them all to work on Ethernet, for example, would just be, insanity. So I just let them have the serial interface they're used to having, run them all at 9600 baud, and then connect them together with this crosspoint matrix. Now that takes care of all those little peripherals. Okay, there is a direct connection between the Mac. I think it's the phone port, one of its 2 ports, and the console of the lead 4th machine, and then it talks to its subordinates through a synchronous serial line. So there is no actual Ethernet on board. Or somebody asked me about fiber, and I actually looked into it, but then to get everything on fiber, we got all these expensive little pieces of power-hungry hardware that do the interface. Even though the cabling goes away, now we got another set of problems. So I had to juggle all those trade-offs in terms of power and simplicity. The other thing is that, as I mentioned, life's too short for reinventing wheels. Most of what I've done on here is just taking other people's products, which are already fine, and throw away their normally inefficient switch linear regulator, and throwing away the plastic, bolting them down, and interconnecting them to these nets. So in most cases, integration of things into this architecture was fairly trivial. Let's see, your other question was software. Oh, software. In the case of GeoQuery, there's a guy at GeoQuery in Naperville who immediately saw the need for this GPS connection. He said, "Well, I'll write that tool in Mac for you." So that was great. Somebody handed me a disk. That's the way I like to work. And let me make a philosophical comment about that too. One of the things that happens a lot in industry is the sort of forced specialization. People spend so much time focused on specific products, like making these things, for example, that they start to see the world through a filter of these things. And that's necessary. If you're gonna work hard enough at something to really, really effectively compete, then there is a certain personal cost, which is that you end up living in this deep mine being dug into a mountain of knowledge, rather than doing what I do, which is wander around the mountain visiting everybody else's mines. So I've discovered there's a sort of symbiosis between generalists and specialists where we need each other. And this thing wouldn't exist if it wasn't for wizard specialists. And what they find of value in this, in addition to things like PR and all that, is the fact that I'm bringing all these different things together and then saying, oh, well, here's what else you can do with your product. And so I've made a lot of those kinds of connections. And I think that's a really valid career choice. I know one of the things that a generalist has to suffer through is countless years of people saying, how come you never finish anything you start? I sure heard that a lot, because I would learn something and spend a lot of time playing with it, and I say, well, okay, I know what that is now, and I'd go on to something else. And this is a perfect plaything for a generalist because I get to play with all kinds of different technologies. So if you find yourself tugged in that direction, it is a valid way to go. The thing that happens at the boundaries between specialties is called consulting.
Yeah. You seem to be a nomadic corporation. There's a $1 million piece of hardware. You're about to, or somebody's is going to be transferred to the computer museum. How's all this activity financed?
Cash flow is pretty much hand to mouth. Most of the electronics, most of the equipment on here was sponsored. There's about 150 corporate sponsors. There's a sort of three-way symbiosis between bike sponsors and media. Cash flow from speaking engagements, occasionally do consulting like on nomadic connectivity and whatever. I had something to do with a wireless barcode wand that the Federal Express is doing now. And publishing, selling books. By selling you this book. That's how it's financed. So I put out the occasional publication. And somehow or other, it all just sort of hangs together. I know one's sugar daddy. See, another ethic that sort of pervaded this whole thing is I've never asked sponsors for money. You know, a typical thing that people do, they want to go off and do some adventure and get sponsors, and so they go get a lot of cash from somebody, and they fly their flag, put logos all over the place. And the media looks at it and goes, oh yeah, publicity stunt, big deal. And, you know, well, it may be really neat, and the person may be going through the same physical challenges and everything else that I do. The difference is that as soon as it's perceived as a publicity stunt, then I think it's almost meaningless. It's funded, it's too easy, right? So as you see, there's no decals all over this thing. What I've always done is said, well, if I genuinely think that somebody's product is really the best solution to the problem, then I'll ask them for it and I'll use it, and I'll quite openly explain to the media why I think that's so. And the media's reaction is, wow, this is just continually evolving, it must be real. And so the sponsored plugs that make it into the print tend to be much more honest and meaningful than, you know, rah, 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 Hewlett Packard, they gave me $50,000. You know, it's a different ethic. So. Yes?
Two-part question about power. You mentioned being in Seattle. Did you ever run out of power in foggy places?
I've never actually had the batteries dead, but I've been able to anticipate that happening and act in time. There's a Resonant Power Technology, makes a wonderful little 10 amp, 12 volt line operated switcher, and I've got that down in there, and I just have a normal, whatever the 3-letter designator is, standard computer style power cord that I can plug in and recharge overnight.
More seriously, what sort of effect does the low power have when you go through selection of what you want to add to the bike in terms of your day-to-day operation? Do you cut down on cellular use because of power? Do you turn off your disk drives when you're not actively in access to things like that?
Yeah, power management is really critical. I found that things that are made for 110 volt operation or even automotive operation are very often very sloppy in terms of power management. They just figure you've got infinite power available, so they didn't put a lot of work into it. I'm really happy to see more and more things happening with battery-powered devices because people are making sleep modes and slow clock modes and things like that. So that has a lot to do with my choice of components. And in terms of daily life, for example, I scheduled a satellite operation. When that thing's on, it's about 3 amps. And you know, that's okay if I'm in full sun and I'm still on a positive power budget with that plus the processor up here. But if I'm not, if I'm in Seattle, then I do have to think about that. So I'll back off to once or twice a day. Same with ham radio. You know, I can pull as much as 10, 15 amps peak when I'm transmitting at 100 watts, just peak, voice peaks. But again, if I'm playing on the ham radio, I tend to back way off on that and scale it down. So yeah, that's a big issue. On the microchip, all the resources will be operating on a scheduler also, with the solar panel output sort of automatically allocated to power management on the boat, and anything left over, I can put in one mode where whatever's left over after keeping batteries and computers happy just goes to propulsion. Any more? Yeah?
What's a typical day's travel?
There is Well, there really aren't any. There are all those little human encounters that spice them. You know, I don't have any particular schedule. One thing I've learned is that trying to create typical days or trying to actually build a schedule. I've seen some people tour cross country by drawing a line across the United States and going from here to there. And the philosophy that's kind of fallen out of this, which I admittedly didn't start with. When I started out, I was getting excited about every state line and every 1,000-mile mark, and, you know, being real macho for a while, until I suddenly realized that, you know, there's no hurry. I do this for a living now. So I found that if you get too obsessed with where you're going, you lose respect for where you are. So that means I always try to accept here, whatever here is. If you start thinking about your obstacle or about your objective as the whole reason for being, then everything between here and there is merely an obstacle. So, given that, the typical day's travel is kind of see what happens, and I may tend in some direction that, oh gee, winter's coming, so I should sort of tend south, you know. But that's about it. Yeah.
So when you go into the campground and set up your tent, what do you take off of this and take into your tent so you can write while you're sleeping?
Everything, the whole system. I've got an Equinox 6. It's a freestanding 6-person dome. It's a giant tent. I can actually stand in the middle without stooping. I disconnect the trailer, put the bike against the back wall, then bring the trailer in and reattach it at 90 degrees, and then I sleep as a hypotenuse. I have a workstation right here. I can use the laptop and stuff on the trailer lid with a little folding camp stool. If I want to, I can take the solar panels off and take them outside, and I have a solar extension cord, which lets me still get sun. And the BYP here disconnects and gives me an external HF antenna. BYP, big yellow pole. So it's back to that point of sort of maximum flexibility and my location being irrelevant. It has to be just as effective for me to work in a tent, on the bike, sitting at somebody's desk, sitting in a hostel or a motel, whatever. Yeah.
Did you actually ride this right in here to LA, or did you get to the outskirts?
No, I'm on a speaking tour right now, so I have a thing I call the Mothership, which is a diesel truck that pulls a 20-foot Wells cargo trailer. It's a mobile lab, and I'm on about a 3-month tour around the U.S. Fortunately, almost over. I've just done about 8,700 miles in the last 10 weeks. And that's the only way I can reasonably make schedules. If I was trying to bike on a schedule, it would just be horrible. So.
Did you ever go to Europe? Have you ever traveled?
I haven't yet. I would like to. I was there to speak at a conference once, but it was before this. So. I do want to do some international travel with the microchip. I've had a lot of invitations in Japan and Europe and Australia and various other places. So in fact, I've got a monthly column in Sun World Japan now. I'm starting to get a lot of mail off that, saying, "Well, bring it here." So yeah.
Does the FCC get you into trouble?
No, I'm totally legal.
Is this for home use, or is this for industrial use?
Well, it's not a product. The problem would be if I was trying to productize it, I would have one heck of a time getting certification. I mean, there's a lot of noise here. In fact, the 68HC11's, this particular implementation has no ground plane. It's really a noisy board. And so I've got some serious birdies, which unfortunately affect the entire HF spectrum, my packet frequencies and everything. There's a wonderful little filter back here. It's called the Magic Notch from JCOM, and it sits on the audio output of your ham radio. And it's just constantly, it's taking a little tiny switch capacitor audio filter, scanning the whole spectrum all the time, and anytime it finds a continuous tone, same frequency there long enough to charge a cap, I guess, it just drops a 30 hertz wide 50 dB notch on top of it. So it's a birdie killer. So the squeals that result from computers being on, I can locally notch out. I'm sure I annoy the neighbors.
What kind of range do you expect to have with your microchip?
Range of travel or range of
can you cross oceans or?
People have done that sort of thing. I find it a bit macho and a bit boring. I mean, I have no interest in trying to cross oceans on that scale. The thing is, as soon as you get out of sight of land, it's just sort of the same.
Right.
I guess there are some diehard around the world sailors who would contest that, but that's just not what I do. So I expect coastal rivers, lakes, intercoastal waterway, those kinds of things. There's an awful lot of water out there that falls into those descriptions. Just I could spend years just wandering around the coastal and river waters of the U.S., much less the rest of the world.
Army, Navy, how about Air Force next?
Well, that's right. That's if we consider the road a one-dimensional thing and the water surface a two-dimensional thing, then we just keep on going. Add the third dimension someday. So. Well, doing that human power is a bit of a challenge. They have to work too hard. A blimp. Could happen. Yeah.
Back to the software issue, you said for a particular piece of, or for a particular problem, somebody hacked the code. Do you have any general solutions in other areas, like cut and paste between your Mac and your PC in any reasonable sense? Because they're all on serial lines, please.
What was that?
I mean, they're all on serial lines.
Yeah. All those different machines are connected to each other. So I mean, I can run if I want to just move files between them. That's fairly trivial. I just run Laplink, Mac. There's no really true live network up right now that makes them all feel like they're multiple terminals on a LAN. Nothing quite like that. That would be nice, and on the boat that will be the case between boats, but just didn't really need it on this one. Most of the devices on here are just little slaves that do what they're told, and it's only one machine that I'm actually interacting with. I can't use the Spark while I'm mobile and it's present implementation. I have to actually stop, open it up, plug it into the back. So, yeah.
Was it a major consideration to have two boats this time instead of one vehicle?
That's a big one. The real question is, do I want a traveling companion?
Yeah.
That's a personal issue, and it's a killer trade-off too. It's sort of one of those. It's another flavor of that fundamental trade-off in life called freedom versus security. When you travel alone, you're like an atom, or willing to interact with all kinds of others and form bonds. Right? If you're traveling with somebody, you're a molecule, you're inert. Wow. I don't know, that's a stretch. No, it really does happen. I've done it both ways, and I find traveling as a couple, that's socially, it's a whole different kind of experience. It's not better or worse, it's just different. So I think on the water, for various practical reasons, if nothing else, I kind of like the idea of having another floating object in case one floating object starts to sink. little things like that, as well as just having a stable. My first 10,000 miles I characterized as being a succession of beginnings and endings. And then my next 6,000 when I was traveling with my friend Maggie was like one big middle, you know. So it's a very different kind of experience. And I'm grappling with that right now. I'm not sure which is best. They're both great. I want it all. That's the problem. Yes.
I asked you earlier, maybe you can elaborate. It seems to me one real obstacle of this kind of lifestyle is the danger. I mean, a lot of people have to back their mind, do this and then get jumped on. You know, the world out there is hostile. So you've done it.
I've gotten a lot of warnings. When I started doing this in Ohio, I had all these people telling me about every other part of the country. I mean, it almost became a little game. You know, I said, well, you know, you watch how you go down through West Virginia, you know, and you better take a machete with you. I got advice to carry gun, tear gas, mace, or machetes. I mean, just all this advice, right? So I was a little nervous. My parents, of course, who were convinced I was going to be a bum all my life, were even sending me clippings about people who were injured while traveling. So, you know, I started off and I got down to the south and it was fine. And then I started noticing that people in the south were kind of amazed that I didn't get hurt in the north. Interesting. And then I started seeing it on a more local scale. I came out of a gas station bathroom once in Alabama, and some guys were standing around talking about it. And one of them said, well, "Where are you headed?" And I said, "Well, I'm heading west." And he goes, "Oh, you going through Louisiana? You better take the 30-06 with you." I said, "Okay, well, thanks for the warning." You know, and I got to Louisiana a couple weeks later, and I came out of a gas station bathroom. This guy standing on the bike, like identical scenario. And one of them said, "Where'd you come from?" And I said, "Well, I just came down most recently through Florida." He said, "You come through Alabama, didn't get mugged?" Wait a minute, you know, everybody's always warning me about every place else. You know, so what that really means is the difference equals danger. You know, most people see something different from them, something far away from them as being dangerous. You know, and a lot of wars are fought over that kind of stuff. You know, we just turn somebody who's different into an enemy. And you know, for another example, I was taught when I was in Santa Fe, New Mexico, by most of the people I was hanging out with, to be afraid of lowriders and be afraid of Hispanics. And I thought, you know, I'm riding around Santa Fe. It's a Hispanic-oriented town. I thought, wait, this is stupid. You know, I'm missing a huge percentage of this culture. So one day I just pulled into a gas station, a closed-down gas station, where a bunch of lowriders were parked and guys were passing around a bottle of Jack Daniels. And I said, "Hey, what's happening?" And I ended up hanging around getting sauced. I had a wonderful time. They're just teenagers in costume, just like anybody else. Yeah. I guess what I found out is that as long as I recognize that there are isolated jerks anywhere, there is no single group or single place that I can characterize as bad. And that's after 17,000 miles of being very exposed and very vulnerable. I've never really been hurt. Now, there have been times when I've been challenged. Patriot, Indiana, I stopped and I heard this big squeal of tires, this big Kragar jacked up thing came zooming across the street. Two punks got out with cigarettes crammed up the sleeves and their arms like this, you know, and goes, "What's this shit?" And I said, "Well, it's a computerized bicycle." I looked him right in the eye, very friendly, not challenged, and I said, "This is a computerized bicycle. I'm riding around the United States, writing a book about it. Haven't you seen it on TV?" And he goes, "Wow, you're on TV with us?" Within about a minute, he was sitting on it. I was showing him how the steering worked, demoing the whole thing. So it's just not rising to that tough guy challenge. It's got me out of trouble a lot. You know, I don't wear sunglasses when I'm interacting with people. You know, those kinds of things. There is that one story that is kind of amusing. I had probably one of the scariest moments on this whole trip. I was on the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal towpath, and this is a 184-mile long bike path that runs parallel to parallel to the Potomac River, right along it. And it lets you get all the way through the Appalachian Mountains without climbing any hills. And you know, it could have been in a Bambi movie. I mean, it was just so idyllic. There's deer and rabbits and this wonderful rippling river and everything. And there was this one area that was right across an open field from Interstate 70. And I looked across and there was cops and traffic all backed up. And a truck had wrecked and tumbled down the hill and split open. And it was just this sudden visual shock after being in this idyllic setting for 2 days. I just put on the brakes and I sat there contemplating this and taking a sip of water. And there was a rustling in the leaves behind me. And I turned around and 5 of the biggest, meanest, toughest looking men I've ever seen in my life stepped out of the woods. Hello. One great big guy about my height, but all muscle and a whole lot bigger around said, "What the hell is this?" And I said, "Well, it's a bicycle and it's kind of like a race, so I got to go now." And the guy with him had this black skull cap on and gold tooth. He said, "You got a gun on that thing, man?" I said, "No, I thought about it. Figured it'd just get me in trouble." He says, "I heard that. You don't be messing with no gun. They get you 15 years in Maryland. Just ask me." I said, "So where are you guys from anyway?" And this one redhead, big knotted, kind of long ponytail and all kinds of scars. I said, "We're convicts from the federal penitentiary up at Hagerstown." I said, "Really? You escaping or what?" And the guy just opened his mouth to answer, and the other guy interrupted, put his hand on my shoulder, and says, "I think we ought to fix our traveling man up here, don't you?" And so I said, well, I'm not sure what that means in convict parlance, but but they seemed like they were kind of kidding around and basically pretty friendly. I mean, for murderers and bank robbers and stuff. So I got off the bike and we started walking and heading off toward this truck wreck. I figured something had to be connected to that. Sure enough, as we were walking, they explained that they were a work release crew and that they were there to clean up the truck. Doesn't explain why they're wandering around in the woods alone, but I saw a cop with a shotgun sitting in the truck, and so I was fairly relaxed, although I don't know what fix up means yet. So we went into this clearing in the woods, and there was this big lumpy mound about the height of the trailer here, about that big, and under a musty old tarp. And the big guy said, "This is our stash, man. The truck was full of this." Turns out, as they're cleaning up the truck, they're stealing stuff from the cargo and hiding it in the woods, and now they want to share it with me. Great, receiving stolen property, living with these guys. So he pulled back the tarp with a flourish, and underneath was this giant mound of Sara Lee pastries. Picked up a box, shoved it into my arm, and said, "Have some walnut cake. This is excellent." I'm cleaning up the last lot, by the way. So. I said, "Oh, thank you." Another guy said, "You don't be messing with no walnut cake, man. You want cheese Danish. That's where it's at." They said I had this armload of Sara Lee pastries while these murderers and bank robbers are starting to argue with each other over which one. So we went back to the bike and they started plucking the stuff out of my hands and shoving it under bungee cords and all bikes festooned with pastries. Finally, I made my getaway and pedaled away eating this Danish. So I have met a lot of strange people on the trip, but I think the convicts take the cake. No, really, I've never said that before. Any more questions? Yeah.
Is there other kind of roads that you can navigate? I would imagine you want an open interstate highway.
I've done interstates. There are places where that's really the only reasonable option, like crossing central Utah and Arizona and such. But given the choice, I prefer little narrow, quiet, untraveled country roads that are also smooth and not too hilly. Yeah.
Does anybody ever approach you about being in film? I mean, like Nova?
Well, actually, I'll be on Nova pretty soon. I just filmed BBC Horizon just recently. Middle here is Nova. The next one coming up is Discovery Channel Next Step, April 27th. Yeah, I've done a lot of that kind of stuff. The biggest, strangest one recently, I had a full hour on the Donahue Show as the only guest, and that was bizarre. Let me tell you, I was really nervous too because I think, what am I doing? As I'm finally getting the thing parked and pulling the bike up, I'm like, wait, this is Donahue. I can see it now. Women who love nomads and the men who leave them behind. But actually, it turned out that Phil really likes this kind of stuff. He's got a laptop and he's got a yacht, and he's really into it. So we actually talked about the whole philosophy of travel and adventure and connectivity and all that stuff. So I got an email from somebody in the net a little while later said, "Congratulations on being the first to get on Donahue on the basis of accomplishment rather than excessive perversion." I'm sure that's not true, but it was funny anyway. Yeah.
What do you eat? Like McDonald's?
Anything I want when I'm on the No, not McDonald's. Whatever I crave, basically. You know, it's a license to pork, basically, when you're a human engine. So it's about 5,000 calories a day, roughly. Big breakfast, lots of carbs. As you might have noticed, I tried to wear a loose T-shirt today, but the CSU, the Calorie Storage Unit, is. I've been driving around in the mothership too much and letting Diesel do the work, so I do need to scale down that a little bit here pretty soon. But, yeah.
You kind of waved your hands over the heads-up display, and I'm curious, is it actually focused in infinity so you can use it while you're riding?
Yeah.
What does it exactly show?
Okay, it's a 720 by 280 screen that appears to float in space. It's what it is internally is it's called the private eye from reflection technology. It's a column of LEDs, 280 LEDs, and there's a little mirror driven in resonance that sweeps that whole column back and forth to create a 720 by 280 raster. And they did it really nicely, so you really don't get much pixelation. It's pretty clean. There's a driver board back there. There's a little slider down here. There's a couple plastic optics, and the slider lets you set the apparent distance. So I just look at the Mac comfortably, and then I set this to look like it's the same distance away, and that way when I glance, and I never have it blocking my vision. I don't know if you notice when it's like this, it's below my right eye. I don't want to interfere at all with binocular vision of the world. I mean, non-maskable interrupts are things like trucks, you know. So that's a whole lot more important than anything that might be happening here. But when I glance down, my right eye sees this and my left eye sees the Mac, and just attention switching between them, and they appear to be overlaid, and I just attention switch between them, and with practice that turned out to be pretty comfortable. The only problem I find with this is that in really bright sun, my pupils are stopped down so much that It's a little hard to see, but it's easy. It works. It's a good product. There's,
I'm just curious, is it expensive for it?
I think they're about $600 or $700, something like that, including the driver board. I just visited them and played with their megapixel model, and it's pretty amazing. You can't see pixels. It looks, you can make a full Sun Workstation screen on one of these things now. It's just a postage stamp size. And they're doing some interesting OEM products, like building them into pagers, cellular phones, and most interestingly, even I was riding around with one of the campus cops last night with this epic parking project, trying to put the mothership somewhere on campus. And he was quite fascinated when I told him about the police microphone for police radio that has a built-in modem, and it lets in one of these little windows right in the mic, so he can put it up to his eye and look at a rap sheet or a picture or something like that. It comes right over the radio. So that all that stuff is being done with the same technology now.
Do you do much computing, email, etc. on the road while you're moving, or you're mostly done off?
When I'm actually on the road, yes, this is my workstation, and you know,
While you're pedaling?
while I'm pedaling, oh yeah, you bet. That's really the primary objective of building all this stuff into the bike, the handlebar, keyboard, and everything. If I'm going, like if I was going through LA to get here, all this stuff would be off. You know, I mean, I'm more worried about survival, but I mean, there's an awful lot of wide open, quiet country roads out there where you don't see more than 5 cars a day. Like the Letter roads in Wisconsin, I mean, you can literally ride 100 miles and see less than 10 cars. And they're smooth and easy, and you know, it's a lot of time when you're awake and alert and otherwise unproductive. I'm not sure I want to be legally responsible for porting this into a product made for automobile drivers, though. I'm sure it's the first time somebody tries to do email while driving a car and blames me for it, I'll probably hear about it. But, yeah.
I don't see any video, either cameras or receivers.
There is a television station back here, and I played with little handheld, little tiny black and white cameras. The boat will have a good video system. One of the 3 screens in the console is a color video active matrix LCD. I played with a little MVP camera, and I put it right where this was, and was sending live video from the road, just cruising around New Hampshire. But next, there's all these things I want to do. You know, one of the things I've discovered here. Well, let me do 2. This is another almost non sequitur, but it reminded me. There's a couple of lessons that I've learned here. One of them is something that I've called the Roberts Law of Applied Mobile Gizmology. And that is, if you take an infinite number of very light things and put them together, they become infinitely heavy. That's not obvious. I mean, a lot of people really ignore that. And in fact, things that are often just thrown freely at projects, like aluminum, for example. Aluminum has exactly the same density as granite, but you think of it as light. You know, so it's real easy to just say, oh, well, I'll just build this aluminum box, and after a while, you think, God, this thing weighs 60 pounds. How'd that happen? You know, so you really have to watch every single step, every step of the design process there. The other thing is what I've called the behemoth effect, and this has counterparts in industry, sometimes called creeping featurization. The behemoth effect here is when the design spec changed from what do I need in order to solve this problem or meet this spec? It changed from that into how much really neat stuff can I integrate into the system. So, you know, in the case of the video, like I added an amateur television station, there was a few things that got added just because they were just too cool to pass up. Most recently, I spoke at AT&T in Shreveport about 6 or 8 weeks ago or something, and they gave me an AT&T video phone. And I found myself instantly dropping it and went, hey, yeah, I'll build into the boat. No, wait, you know, we're not there yet. But I have to think in terms of what is actually necessary to solve the problem more than, however, there will be video phones.
Well, I was thinking that you could document your travels.
Yeah. Yeah, the boat will have it for sure. In fact, I'm working with Chuck Colby on one part of it, which is a little turret that comes up with a first surface mirror that's driven by a stepper and a single video camera looking up. So, you know, anywhere on the horizon, and with autofocus, it can, you know, look at me or look forward or whatever. It's also great for security. So to look around. Yes.
About how big is the boat going to be?
It looks like either 19 or 22 foot hull, depending on which company I ultimately go with. Without riggers, it's overall 11 feet wide. I'm trying to keep the total weight of the system to about 450 pounds. And then when it's in road mode, it'll be that length of hull plus an 8 foot long recumbent bicycle. So it's going to be a bizarre sight. Yeah.
Are there services which you subscribe to, like Prodigy and things like that, which you find very useful?
Not Prodigy.
Or have you identified any other such services that, like new services that you wish were available for mobile people to subscribe to?
Yeah, something that lets me download really high quality maps would be nice. I've talked to some of the people in the map GIS industry about that. You know, I do have a CD-ROM drive, which I can use in either the Spark or the Mac, but That's not a good solution. It doesn't work mobile. It's too power hungry. It's too sensitive to shock. You know, it's just not the right solution. And on the boat, I want to be able to download charts and also a lot of information services, a lot of data about what's available locally and things like that. There are some travel services online, but they're text-based and fairly hokey. I did find a neat thing recently, by the way, called AccuWeather Forecaster runs on the Mac. I can bring up a picture of the U.S. with all the weather patterns on it, get the historical data of about 11 different phenomena, even look at a real-time picture of the U.S. while connected. And within 3 seconds of any lightning strike anywhere in the U.S., it flashes a dot on the screen. So it's, there's that stuff having to do with things where you are, and you know, database is too big to haul around. I'd also like to see online IC data books and things like that. And sometimes by myself, I carry a microfiche documentation library of 74HC and other really commonly used stuff, but there's a long way to go. Dialog has got a really nice front end now. They're getting better and better, and so on. As to the services I do use, Internet is my primary interface with the universe. I do have a Genie account, and I have accounts on other things like CompuServe and MCI Mail, but I find that if I publish them to the world and people send me mail there, then they get mad because I never check them. So every system worth its salt has got some kind of an internet gateway now. So most of what I do is mail.
Do you have a lightning problem?
No, the only time I've ever really come close, I mean, I tend to like lay low if it's really nasty weather. I used to have a xenon strobe on the top of a flagpole, and that flashed 3 times in rapid succession once in New Mexico when a lightning strike hit close. By the way, speaking of high energy phenomena, here's a stretch. One of my little hobbies on the first trip used to be to leave a tape recorder running while off bike. Let's say I go in a little cafe in some small town and just let a tape recorder record comments. And then on my way to the next town, I'd listen to things people said. That's a whole lot funnier than listening to it when I'm there because it's just neat, you know, answering questions. So this was East Texas, and I was riding along listening, and there's this generally inaccurate speculation about the bike, and finally there's this long pause, and this one guy said, "Damn, that dude could survive a nuclear war." He doesn't know about EMP. Right in that same area, by the way, I got a great piece of advice. Some guy said, "Where are you headed?" And I said, "Well, I'm heading west across the United States, out to California, up the coast." He goes, "Ah, you're crazy." And I said, "Well, why is that?" He says, "It's uphill all the way." I said, no, it's up and down. And he goes, "Yeah, you'll go downhill sometimes, but even when you do, you're gaining elevation." It's a strange world out there. Okay, we ought to wind up. Thank you.